Hello, Austin. Today on Lone Star Politics, I'm going to be discussing the Texas State Legislature with Matt Simpson of the ACLU of Texas. Matt and I were down at the state capitol today testifying at the Senate committee hearing on transportation and homeland security. That committee is chaired by a gentleman by the name of Tommy Williams. One of his bills called for tracking devices, GPS tracking devices being placed on automobiles or other vehicles, be it bike, truck, of people that are suspected of having gang relations. This is without a warrant. This man wants to place tracking devices on citizens' automobiles without a warrant. Doesn't anyone think that tracking someone, their whereabouts, should require a warrant? That's just unbelievable to me. The idea that someone swore an oath to uphold both the U.S. and Texas constitutions, and this person is proposing legislation that is so unconstitutional. This is a session where the Texas state budget, where we're short $27 billion. Let me just say that again. $27 billion. So how is the state legislature making up this money? Well, they're cutting education and they're cutting health care, health and human services. There are going to be huge cuts there with dramatic implications both this next year as well as in the future as our children in Texas go to school with a lot less resources being allocated to their education. So this is going to have a lot of impact on the future of Texas as well. Matt, what is a fusion center?
These fusion centers, as they're called, are a collaboration between federal, state, and local actors, law enforcement agencies, and they work together to share information. And at bottom, maybe that's not the worst idea in the world, but the question is, how does that work? We've got this document, we've got this Constitution, and it tells us some things about that, but it's also was written a long time ago, and so it doesn't take into account information gathering. It doesn't take into account, even the internet. That alone is a major social development.
So these fusion centers were started after 9/11 in an effort to fight terrorism, not only foreign but domestic.
Absolutely.
And the way the federal government believed to do that was to monitor the activities of U.S. citizens and hopefully be able to connect the dots of perhaps a future crime.
The question, I think, a lot of times when it gets down into the nitty-gritty is, are you monitoring someone that you have a reasonable suspicion? Do you have some kind of constitutionally based standard to understand, to recognize, yes, they're involved in crime? Can you, a simple way to think about it is, could you point to that person and say, because of reasons X, Y, and Z, I'm concerned that they're involved in crime, and that's why we're investigating. Or are you just investigating
reasonable
people?
Suspicion. That
Right.
seems to be a very key word. Reasonable suspicion.
Mm-hmm.
Not just because, for example, in the South, not just because you're black in a white neighborhood,
Right.
not just because you wear a motorcycle jacket, not just because you're a veteran. These are not reasons to follow or investigate somebody. There's not a reasonable suspicion that this person has committed a crime or will commit a crime.
That's absolutely right, and I think that how we as a society and how our domestic intelligence, infrastructure operates, we need to figure out how to make sure it honors that. It honors that constitutional limit. In terms of fusion centers, there are over 70 in the entire country. There are 7 in Texas.
We have 1/10 of the fusion centers?
We do.
That's a lot. We don't have 1/10 of the population, do we?
Everything's
I think we're
bigger.
less than that.
We're just below that.
Boy.
But so there's a state DPS run fusion center here in Austin, and there's also a regional center here in Austin, and there's regional centers in San Antonio, Dallas, Houston, Collin County outside of Fort Worth, and El Paso. And so we have a pretty, I would say maybe complete infrastructure for information sharing. And what we're seeing both, in all honesty, both at the federal and state level, and really at the local level too here in Austin, people are asking the question, okay, it's been 10 years since 9/11, roughly, and we're heading into a new era of technology, even from 2001. And we've set up this infrastructure to do domestic intelligence. And now we've realized that the capacity is such that you could literally track an innocent person, whatever, all over Austin or in their daily lives in ways that are incredibly invasive. Your medical records, your purchases, your movements, where your car goes. All these things are much more public than I think we acknowledge because of some of the various technologies that are available.
And it's not expensive to do that, is it? It's not expensive to monitor someone's credit card purchases and I don't know the location of their cell phone, assuming you can get access to it. These are not expensive things to do. It's not like hiring a private investigator to watch each person and learn about them.
Right. Yeah, you bring up. I mean, that's exactly you. I appreciate you. You've made the same. I think that's the same point I was trying to make, and that's that with this technology things, it's just easier. It's just cheaper, faster, and easier to monitor people.
To monitor everybody, just like George Orwell had us in 1984. Yeah. We can all be watched and seen and tracked with very little money.
If we're to be people thinking forward about how our policy should look in this state, in this country, we should realize that kind of stuff is only getting easier and easier to do. Keeping track of somebody's bank records, keeping track of their movements, and a lot of other things that happen in very few cases, but in very kind of tragic or very violative situations. That's only going to get easier and easier for law enforcement to do. It's really on us. We live in a time right now where we can see what direction the technology is headed. We can see what direction society is headed in terms of our attitudes towards these invasions, and I think it's time that we start to make our policies kind of reflect that. I mean, I think where we're at right now, we don't have good checks and balances over our law enforcement.
Can you tell us about the Fusion Center bill hearing today at the Texas State Legislature?
So the ACLU and Texans for Accountable Government and Texas Impact and a few other groups here in Austin worked with the police department here in Austin to help set up the rules that were going to be applied to the Domestic Intelligence Gathering Fusion Center here. It's called the Austin Regional Intelligence Center. That experience really, I know for me personally, and I'm almost sure for the other groups and activists involved, I know that really solidified the need to have some kind of statewide standards. Because Austin, for whatever concerns you may have about the police department here, they were really open to community involvement, and I think that they made a lot of efforts to try to meet us halfway. Now, did that happen or not? Who knows? But I think that what really scared me was the idea of there are communities where there isn't that level of community input at the police department level, where fusion centers are being set up with literally no community input. That's an undemocratic imbalance of input. You need to have the community that's going to be subject to this engaged. Or fundamentally, it starts to grow very questionable. And I think as we saw with the North Texas Fusion Center, which had a couple of gaffes in the past couple of years, they found out that everybody that lived in their jurisdiction was actually pretty upset with them because they were making huge mistakes publicly about following people and they shouldn't have been, or sounding alarms they shouldn't have been.
So the ACLU with other community activist groups got involved at the local level and worked with the Austin Police Department to establish a policy for the Austin Fusion Center. That sounds like just a great way to get involved locally and get involved in local government to help shape policy that affects you in your town. More on the Texas State Legislature with Matt Simpson when we return.